Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this Friday. It is Friday, September 20th. We are 46 days out from the election this year. Holy cow. Holy cow, everybody. As we near the election, we are thinking more about election security, election protection, ensuring that voters feel safe and secure and validated in the election system, both here in Oklahoma and across the country, to be honest. And this is something that's been on my mind for several weeks or months. And then this week, the governor and our state election officials sent out a notice that really kind of caught the eye of a lot of news stories. If you receive our emails, you probably got an email from me about it as well. And I wanted to take a few minutes today to focus on that in this episode, in case you didn't get the email or didn't read it. Governor Stitt's statement was about election integrity efforts and removing ineligible voters from the rolls. And we're going to talk a little bit about phrasing, the tone, the words chosen, and the actual content itself. And I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to read the statement. I will link to it in the show notes here. And in fact, I'm going to encourage you to skip past the narrative piece, because that's the part that gets a little, I don't know, not sideways, but like, it's just like a little hard to read. And then down at the bottom, there's a section that says Oklahoma election fast facts. And these are just a series of bullet points. There's probably 10 of them. And I'm going to read them to you because I think it's a good reminder about how we run our elections here. It says, Oklahoma continues the tradition of using hand-marked paper ballots, which are counted by an e-scan tabulator. The e-scan vote tabulators do not have the capability to connect to the internet. Election officials work closely with Oklahoma Cyber Command to protect our election system from would-be attackers. During recounts and post-election audits, results are confirmed by hand counting those paper ballots. State and county election boards are bipartisan, including even the poll workers at a location are bipartisan. In 2020, there was a bill, Senate Bill 1779, the Governor Stitt signed into law that outlaws the practice of, quote, ballot harvesting, which wasn't really a thing that was happening, but that is the law nonetheless. We have voter ID laws. Only U.S. citizens who are residents of Oklahoma may register to vote, and state law explicitly prohibits non-citizens from accessing voter registration services. And this is about poll watchers, and polling places across Oklahoma are staffed by volunteers and voters just like you. And you can learn how to become a poll worker. There's a link to it there. That's all fine and good, right? The bulk of the narrative section, in fact, the very first paragraph says, quote, as part of Oklahoma's routine voter list maintenance as required by law, officials announced over 453,000 voter registrations have been removed, including ineligible voters such as convicted felons and deceased voters, since 2021. Now that's true, but that is an enormous number, right? 453,000 voters. And that was the piece that I think has really caught the public's attention, the media's attention, and with good reason, right? Because this statement lacks some of the nuance to it of explaining this, I felt like we needed to add some context. If you keep reading, though, down a couple of paragraphs, in a paragraph that is not in bold print, I guess about half of the statement's in bold print, but the third paragraph says, since January 1st of 2021, which is almost now 3 full years ago, Oklahoma elections officials have removed 97,065 deceased voters, 143,682 voters who moved out of state, 5,607 felons, or people who have been convicted of a felony, would be better terminology, but I digress. 14,933 duplicate registrations. It's wild to me that we had that many duplicates in the system ever. And that, again, this wasn't all at once. This is over the last 3 years. And 194,962 inactive voters who were canceled during the address verification process. Okay, let's talk about this, right? Like, should we be removing voters from the voter rolls for any reason? And I know that I run afoul of some of my good friends on this. And that's okay, right? I think I deal a lot with big data sets and big lists, including using the voter file. I use it almost every day. Maintaining our email distribution list. Heck, if you keep a Christmas card mailing list, right, that you deal with a list on a much smaller scale, it's really hard to maintain big lists. And I don't want any eligible voter to be prevented the opportunity to vote. And this is one of those points of intersection where I think my desire to ensure every eligible voter has the opportunity to vote sometimes kind of is at odds with my desire to have good, clean data. And thankfully, I'm not in charge of our state's voter list file. But I think we could probably all understand that it is good for lots of reasons to have a clean list, right? Again, I don't think any eligible voter should be pushed off unnecessarily. And the process of being identified as an inactive voter is not well understood by the masses. And it's not necessarily the best way, but the way that we do it in Oklahoma is that if you don't vote, and what they say is two general election cycles. So basically 4 years, right? 2 full years. So like 2021 and 2022, that's one cycle. And then 2023 and 2024, that's another cycle. So if you don't vote for 4 years, then the election board sends you a letter and says, well, then you're flagged as being inactive. And if you didn't vote in any election during that 4-year period, including the presidential, the gubernatorial, and all of the many state and local elections. And if you don't vote, then you're flagged as inactive, but you were still registered and still able to vote. And then I think they send a letter then. And then if you don't vote for the next 4 years, the next 2 more general election cycles, then you have the potential to be removed from the rolls as being inactive. So I think you basically have to not vote in any election for 8 years. And it could be as long as 10, depending on when they send the letter. And then after that, it's when they remove you. Now, are there people out there who just chose not to vote or maybe didn't want to vote? Like maybe you registered when you're 18 and then you were in college for a few years and then you were doing grad school or residency and you knew you were going to return home. You just didn't vote, or you didn't feel inspired or connected to any candidate or whatever reasons, right? Maybe you were in a coma for a few years. Who knows? Should they be removed? And that is a judgment call. And in fact, I'll be honest, like I was talking to my wife about this last night and she said, no, like we should not be removing voters who are inactive. She's like, just because they don't want to vote doesn't mean they don't deserve to be registered. And I agree with that. But I also don't like having messy data. It is hard. Like we run a lot of analysis about how many registered voters are actually in our state that are active. And when we see the statistics about low voter turnout, one thing that helps those numbers look better is people voting, right? Higher turnout helps. And also making sure that the denominator in that fraction is actually representative of who's out there. We know that in Oklahoma, there are basically about 3 million eligible voters, right? Right now, we've got about 2.38 million that are registered. So in simple numbers, 3 million eligible, 2 million that are registered, and only about 1 million of those vote, what I say regularly, reliably. Very few people vote in every election. I myself have missed elections on occasion, even in the last few years while doing this work. Sometimes I've tried. I voted absentee and forgot to sign my inner envelope, and my vote wasn't counted. Like there's things like that happen. And so I think this is something we should all, wrestle with, right? I'm not saying I don't think that having a good, clean list should supersede people's right to vote. But the state does do some outreach. They contact people at their home and try to get them to know that they haven't voted and to know they're labeled as inactive and encourage them to vote. That's something. That's more than some states do. Could our state do more? Yes. Do I wish they would? Yes, of course. I also wish, and I said this in an article in Oklahoma Voice that was published today, that I wish that our state In addition, like if they're going to take action to remove voters, they should take an equal or greater action at registering new voters, right? If you're willing to clean up the list by removing people, you should be willing to have good, accurate lists by doing outreach to all eligible voters or to adding automatic voter registration so that everyone, when they turn 18 or when they interact with any state agency, that they are automatically registered. Maybe they're given the chance to opt out. They're just registered by default. They get information sent to them. And then if they choose not to vote for a period of 8 years or 10 years or whatever, that they might be, receive notice. Okay, listen, we're going to register you. If you don't vote for the next 8 years or 10 years, we will unregister you at that time. That may be an option. I just think that there's a lot of ways we could act as a state to better encourage voter participation, right? There are some structural things that, we're working on, right? Open primaries or like unified primaries that everybody gets to vote in. That would be huge. That would give a lot of voters the feeling, and not just the feeling, they would actually mean that many, many voters' votes matter more than they do right now. Closed primaries block out, in many cases, half the electorate that just aren't allowed to vote in very consequential elections for the people that will represent them. And by changing that so that every voter's vote matters, that's a big deal. That drives involvement, engagement. I think that would be helpful too. So there's definitely some tweaks. But I think there's some state and federal laws that govern list maintenance. And I think most people understand that there's a balance to be struck here, right? How do we ensure that we are doing adequate outreach to unregistered people to get them to register? How do we make attempts to engage those who are registered and not participating, right? And then when absolutely necessary, when those other attempts have failed, and they failed repeatedly over a period of years, maybe some people need to be removed, not as a punitive measure, but for the sake of ensuring that our list is accurate, right? We do a lot of, the state election board does a lot of maintenance and like trying to track down everyone who dies. And maybe they're registered here, but they die in Montana, right? Well, you've got to get records across the country. It's really hard to like keep these lists up to date. People who change their names, who move out of state, who, some folks might be convicted of a felony. They might also regain the right to vote once they've completed their sentence. There's people who move into the state, and that's a number that the governor doesn't mention, right? His press release touts the number of voters that have been purged from the rolls, and the way he touts it makes it sound like it happened this week. Well, 450,000 voters would be almost 25% of registered voters, and if they did that in a week, I'll be the first to tell you I'd be in the steps of the Capitol raising hell about it. That's not what they did. He totaled up normal maintenance over 3 years and then framed it to make it seem like he was a tough guy, right? That he's being real tough. Like, I'm being hard, we're being very secure. And the timing of this is also suspect, right? Like, this comes as the SAVE Act is being heard in Congress, and there's like all of this conversation that's in many cases making a mountain out of a molehill, right? There's this presentation that there's like a bunch of undocumented people that are voting around the country, and that is simply not true. There's zero evidence of that being true. In every state, there are safeguards, including Oklahoma, safeguards to prevent and people who are ineligible from even registering and from voting. And I think in many cases, those safeguards go too far. But this fear-mongering that, and the rumors, the lies that there are, tens of thousands of undocumented immigrants who are voting in our elections is just not true. Full stop. Like, that's not the case. There's zero evidence of that, aside from like the MyPillow guy making allegations, who is not a reputable source of voter information. So I don't like the way that the governor said this, because I think list maintenance is necessary, but removing voters is a last resort, right? Like, after many attempts have been made to re-engage those voters. I also think in this, we all have to look inward a little bit. about what we are doing as nonprofit organizations and as individual voters ourselves. And listeners, I'm talking about you and me, right? What are we doing to ensure that people in our orbit, in our lives, are not just registered, but actively voting, right? This is an election that has enormous consequences. Every election has consequences. And I think this election, we all know, is a big deal. Voting for president is a big deal. All of the down ballot races, also a big deal. Oklahoma, there'll be 2 state questions, which we will address in a future episode, but it's a big deal. Like, all this stuff shapes the future of our world in important ways, and we should vote. And beyond that, we should put forth some effort to make sure that we're creating a culture of civic engagement in our communities, right? And that means you might have to have a conversation, a friendly one, a positive one, but a conversation nonetheless with people in your workplace, in your church, your family, that your grandpa or your uncle who you know might think differently and probably vote for the other guy. If you believe that everyone should vote, you should make sure they're registered, right? Like, this is the ethical and moral quandary that we face on an individual level too, is people say we want everybody to vote, and then you ask them, what about people who disagree with you? And a lot of folks are like, well, I'm okay with some people not voting. And you just can't morally have it both ways, right? Either you want everybody to vote or you don't. Those are the 2 options. And I know that my more partisan friends disagree with that, but that's where I fall. I genuinely wish everybody would vote. I wish we had compulsory voting. I'd love to see how that changes the face of the electorate, particularly, and perhaps only, if we ensure that we have other measures that allow every vote to be counted and voters' preferences to be more fully expressed. So, unified primaries, maybe someday, ranked choice voting, things like that really better capture the perspective of voters, I think, are highly important. And I'm putting the cart before the horse. So this list maintenance, this big number, just to reiterate, did not happen this week. The fact that he is mentioning it 46 days out from the election is not by accident, right? This has been going on every month for decades, and the governor chose to say it this week because he was trying to be part of this national conversation about voter ID laws and election security and all that. And like I said, a good chunk of the statement that he put out was fine and good. I don't always agree with the phrasing, but I think we'll take from it the good parts and we'll highlight the things that could have been better, right? I think, to quote a friend of mine who sent me a message the other day about this, they said that, from time to time we find ourselves actually having to tell everyone that some policy action isn't as extreme as an elected official claimed it is, right? And, this voter list purge looks like we're somehow cleaning up their mess, right? Like me doing this podcast and the email and these conversations looks like I'm trying to clean up the governor's mess in some way, but they are incentivized, right? The governor and other elected officials are incentivized, thanks in part to closed primaries, to make things sound worse than they are. And they are often abetted by their opponents who are incentivized to make things sound worse so that they can take advantage of that outrage, right? And I think in this, the governor's trying to say one thing to send a signal to his base, like, look at me, I'm a tough guy, preventing the illegals from voting in our elections, which wasn't happening. But he's just trying to virtue signal to his base. And in doing so, it ignites the outrage on the other side, right, from Democrats who were like, how dare you purge anybody from the lists? Because that headline, and I very easily could have sent out an email asking for money to help us do voter contact and trying to use that outrage both to fundraise, which we need, and to garner support, right, against the governor. And that, for one, he's not even on the ballot. That's another issue. And second, we're nonpartisan anyway. But I don't think that's the right thing to do. And, we'll see. Hopefully, listeners and our other followers kind of know where let's fix this falls in this, and that we're not the most extreme on either side on most any issue. But it does leave us in the middle, those of us who care about the truth, to say that the governor's statement doesn't really do anything. It doesn't change anything in terms of how our state operates. It does change or affect or color people's perception of him and the government and our election systems, right? I believe that our election secretary, Paul Zirax, wants to do a good job, and he runs a tight ship. It's probably like a little bit tighter than I think it needs to be. But I also know that when you're running this ship, you probably want to err on the side of caution. And I also know that even if it is tighter than I think it might need to be, he still is facing baseless allegations from the right, from members of his own party, that it's not tight enough. And in some ways, he's in a lose-lose position, right? He's trying to run an election system that is safe and secure and open to everybody. And when both sides are upset, as I've been told in the past, that often means you're doing the right thing. So where does that leave us, listeners? Where does that leave us, and what can we do about it, right? I try in every episode for it to end on some note that gives you an idea of what you can do, how you can be helpful. And I will come back to what I just said a minute ago. Talking to your friends, your family, your coworkers, your uncle, your neighbor, whomever, about voting. Given this news and given the attention it's received by the media, I think it's a great time to remind everyone in your life to go check the registration status, right? Especially if they haven't voted. You don't have to ask. People may not always admit it. We run lists all the time trying to identify those irregular voters, right? People who don't vote that often, and make sure that we do some outreach to them and try to re-engage them. That's part of what we do every month, right? If the election board is going to remove folks every month, we're going to take time every month to reach out to voters and try to get them back into the fold, like into the active civic system. And you, listeners, have a big part of that. You can really help do outreach and ask people if they're registered and just encourage them to go check the registration. They can go to the Oklahoma Voter Portal. Just Google Oklahoma Voter Portal. It'll take you to the State Election Board website. You can sign in with your name and date of birth, find your polling place, view your sample ballot, request an absentee ballot, whatever you want to do. It's all right there. That's a great step that everybody should take. Man, if every registered voter who was outraged or even curious about the governor's message this week did that, we could reach everybody in the state in a hurry, right? So I think that alone would be a big deal. And then if folks aren't registered, right, just normalizing civic engagement, normalizing voting as something that is good and normal and nonpartisan, right? You can encourage people to go vote without telling them who to vote for. You can talk about the values, the merits, the virtues of voting as a citizen, of participating in this country where we get to do this. There's a lot of countries where elections are not fair and not free or don't even happen at all, right? We should not be so privileged that we are forgetful of that privilege, that we overlook the fortune we have to live in this country that does have fair and free elections. And when we take it for granted, when we don't participate, right, we miss out on a core piece of what it means to be an American, to live in a democratic republic. We miss out. We forfeit that right that so many have fought for so long to have. So whether you are someone who is late to the party or you've been here for a long time, either way, you have a role to play in making sure that everybody in your life is registered and is going to participate. Now, you can't get everybody. Like, I'll just acknowledge this. I know some of you are listening and yelling at your radio like, I asked my uncle 3 times and he doesn't want to vote. He thinks it's a sham. And look, you tried though, right? I'm not asking you to win. I'm asking you to try. The fact that you tried is what matters. You can give people the opportunity. If they don't choose to do it, that's okay. That's on them. But you've left no stone unturned. You've done all you can. You've led the horse to water. Insert your other idiom here, right? You've done all you can do. That's all we ask. Okay. That's really all I have today. Ryan Walters, there's a grand jury. There's things that are happening. The stuff with the Kaimichi River, there's lots of stuff going on interstate. And I'll be honest, my brain is full. I've spent all week thinking about voter registration. Thinking about the governor's statement this week. Really threw off my day yesterday. I had other stuff planned. But we are really excited about how things are shaping up this year. There is a different level of excitement about this election than we had 3 months ago. I think people are more interested in having more choices. This week was National Voter Registration Day. We went to some libraries. We registered some voters, had really great conversations. And we will be out in the field this next week. We'll be at the Bethany Library a couple of days registering voters. If you happen to be in the Bethany area, swing by. We'd love to see you. Bring your friends who aren't registered. Bring your 18-year-old child with you. Come register. We'll be in the afternoons on Tuesday and Thursday. And then next Saturday, that's the 28th, we will be in the Plaza District from noon until 9 p.m. with a booth. We'll be doing voter registration all day. And next Saturday, 9/28, at 4 p.m. at the OKC Improv there in the Plaza District, we'll be hosting a panel discussion with former Congresswoman Kendra Horn, ACLU Oklahoma's Executive Director Tamaya Cox-Duray, and CARE Oklahoma's Deputy Director Veronica Lazur. It'll be great. We're going to talk about civic engagement, why it's important, and we can talk about these issues too, right? I'm sure someone will bring this up. I'm sure I probably disagree with some of those folks. We'll talk about it. Let's talk about what it means to be an American, what it means to be Oklahoman, what it means to be a participant in society in this day and age. All right. On that note, we're going to wrap up. Take this time. Just go ahead and Google Oklahoma Voter Portal. Send that link in a text message to 3 friends right now and say, hey, they removed some voters this week. Have you confirmed that you're registered to vote? Just send them the link and see what happens, right? Let those conversations flow. Have a good weekend.